safety and risk assessment. There's a few things that I want to talk about before we move on. Just a few little things to kind of take into consideration. I'm sure you're all very used to webinars now and WebExes with the situation that we're all in. So hopefully you're going to really enjoy this session, the next hour. But if I could really ask if you could all mute, you should be all muted anyway. But just in case, if you can just double check that to avoid any background noises. I've tried to do that myself today at home, and I hope that the doorbell or something doesn't go off, but we never know. So if you could mute, that would be great. We really want you to participate as much as possible. We're going to have quite a few participants today, which is super exciting. So it would be difficult if everybody started talking at the same time. So if you have any questions while I'm talking, please do put that in the chat function that you'll be able to see here on the top of your screen. There should be a chat function, and you can send a message to us. We've got a great team here at ICW. So we've got Kylie, who's there now, who will be monitoring those questions and keep them for me later on so that we can go through those. These are being recorded, which is really useful. So you can come back and have a look later on if I went through something too quickly, or for those that couldn't make it today, we've recorded that. So I just want you to be aware of that. If you are showing any videos of yourself, feel free to turn the video off. That's fine if you be more comfortable, or you can leave it on as well, but it will be recorded. If you're having any issues for the next hour, and you can't use the chat function, or you need to talk to somebody, there's an email there at the bottom of the slide which you can use to contact the team, and they will try and help you remotely, or if you've got any questions, or you might have a big question that doesn't fit in the chat, wherever it may be, then you can send an email to that email there. So that's me. Nice photo I had done there, look a bit different there today. So my name is Geraldine Koch, as I've mentioned. I'm actually joining this webinar, presenting this webinar from the sunny UK today. It's very nice here this morning in London. I'm a product safety consultant. I have my own consultancy for the last 4 years. I've been working in product safety for 16 years. It's a passion of mine for sure, but it's also my job, which is great, and I'm very lucky to be able to do that. I've done a number of training sessions, recently in lockdown as well. I've done a few webinars, which has been really great actually. It's pushed us to try and put more training online, but I've trained over 1,000 people on product safety, risk assessment, and also on driver CPC, so their professional competence on safety. I really enjoy doing training, and I love helping people learn about product safety, because it can be quite complex. It can be quite overwhelming sometimes trying to understand all the different parts of product safety. And most recently as well, I did a lot of training with trading standards here in the UK, so the enforcement authorities, which was really great as well. Great to do that training. I'm working on a key few projects that I want to mention really briefly. I'm working on injury data collection. It's really important. Anyone that's on the call that knows me will know how passionate I am about injury data. So I'm working on a great project collecting injury data from UK hospitals. I'm also the technical author for a PAS, which is a publicly available specification here in the UK, and this is on button and coin batteries, which can be incredibly hazardous to young children or to anyone that swallows it. I also work with BSI, British Standards Institute, as a CPIN coordinator, which is basically ensuring that consumers are represented on standards. So that's a bit about myself. I don't want to talk too much about that. And Jan will introduce herself a bit later on as well. And bear with me, with technology, if anything happens and it goes a bit slow, I'll let you know. But please do as well, put it on the chat if you're experiencing any issues, and I hope that you can all hear me and see me okay. So we've only got an hour, which is going to be great. We're going to talk about some really interesting stuff. So I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes, and then I'm going to hand over to Jan, who's going to talk about the technology at ICW and the systems that they've got, which are really great. And then we'll have 10 minutes at the end for some questions and answers. So please do send some questions, otherwise the last 10 minutes will be a bit quiet. But we can do that at the end, and we've got time for that at the end. And what we're going to talk about is product safety and risk assessment. So I've got a lot of experience in risk assessment, whether it be proactive or reactive. And I'm going to give you some tips on what I use when I'm completing a risk assessment. It is very grey doing a risk assessment, but we're going to talk about that, and hopefully you're going to find that valuable. Some people sent some questions beforehand, which is really appreciated. And if we do more webinars like this, we hope to, ICW and I hope to do more webinars like this, then you can send those questions in and we can try and build the presentation around it. So I've put a few key things in there that we will talk about. So Brexit. I wish it was our biggest problem that we have at the moment, because we've got obviously other issues, but I'll talk about that really briefly. There's not much to say about it, but we will try our best to cover that. How to complete a risk assessment we're going to talk about, and I'm going to focus on the European methodology. So it's the GPSD, and sorry to use acronyms here if you're not used to them, but GPSD is the General Product Safety Directive. And RAG is the risk assessment guidelines. We're going to talk about the consequences of not complying with requirements. I think a few questions came in about what happens if you don't follow the testing or the compliance. And, you know, in my opinion, it's not really an option. But we can talk about that in a bit of detail. And then a very specific question we had about risk assessment and safety assessment. So I'll talk about that, but that's product related, basically. It depends on what product you're looking at. So one thing I want to talk about, which is really important, and it really does depend on your organisation and your experience, is legislation. You know, at a minimum, you have to comply with the legislation for the market that you're distributing in. And this can be really complex. I worked on a project last year identifying the requirements for apparel, so textiles, for 70 countries around the world, and it was, you know, it's quite repetitive. You have to constantly, you're searching. It's a difficult task to do, but it's a really, really important one. And once you understand that, after that, it makes it a little bit easier. But you really need to know the market that you're distributing to. There may be requirements for products, like you might have to have testing at a certain laboratory, etc. And it's really important to understand that. And obviously, some of the key markets that I look at and I've worked in are Europe and the UK. And there are some similarities, but it's not really acceptable. Well, it's not acceptable to have a product in the UK, for example. If you're selling in America and UK, you can't just have the testing done for the US requirements. So if it's a toy, for example, and you've got an ASTM F963 certificate, it says it's safe, it says it's fine, that's not going to work in the UK for having that test report. You need to have the test report for the market that you're in. If you've got a good relationship with your lab, and this is where ICW can really help you, is working with a lab that can test for possibly 3 or 4 markets. If you're selling in the UK, Germany, America, and Australia, there are similarities with the testing, and they could combine that and help you get that test report that works for you. So it's really important to have trust with the lab that you work with as well, because they will only test if you say to them, I just want you to test this section of a standard. They'll do that. So you've got to be careful with the testing that you're doing on your product. So it can be quite complex, basically, the legislation around the world, and it is ever changing. which makes life fun, but you need to keep on top of those requirements. So going specifically for the EU and the CE mark, so some of you might know what this is and others might not know what it is. But if you put a CE mark on a product, you are self-certifying, you're saying that the product complies with the applicable standards or legislation. So for example, if you have a toy and you put a CE mark on it, you're saying that it complies to the requirements of EN 71 and all the relevant parts. You know, you can't just put a CE mark on a product and not do any testing necessarily to back it up, unless you really know your product that well. There are requirements for the height and the size and the format, as you can see there. They're very, very specific. So it's a minimum of 5 millimeters is the size of the CE mark. That's what it should be, and it should be indelible. So you can't take it off unless you've got a really good reason why you can't do that. There are specific requirements. And the CE mark you'll find on things like toys, electrical products, medical devices, and PPE and things like that. So it's applicable to quite a few products. So it's important to know your product and know what requirements are there. And I've got on each slide, you'll see at the bottom, there's the website where I might have got the information from and where you might find further information, but there's a lot of info out there. Brexit. Okay, the B word, right. So we are actually in the transition phase. You know, we are in that right now, as it says. We have actually left the EU. That's basically all that's been decided. There's been a lot of work in the background, you know, with the mega SI and all these documents to help with the transition. But for the focus of this presentation and product safety, some key things you may or may not be aware of, I'm going to mention. So you've got 27 member states, although the UK is no longer part of it. And you have, for example, if I say, you know, Germany and France and all of the other ones, they have always had their own requirements for those countries. So you will find specific requirements in Germany, for example, particularly maybe for chemicals, that are not relevant in other countries. So you've always had to understand each market in each area. I knew something would happen. That's my phone going off, so apologies for that. You have to, and it has been enacted in each country. So when you have a European piece of legislation, it has to be enacted in each country. So that still stands. EN 71, which is a European norm, that has been enacted in each country. So with BS EN 71, in France it's the NF standard, etc. And you still need to comply with all of those requirements. Still stands now, even after Brexit. The one key thing that I want to know is about the UK CA mark. So this is a mark that is basically replacing the CE mark in the UK. So if you're selling in the UK, they are expecting, unless we hear otherwise, for the UK CA mark to be applied to your product. The good news is that the government websites in the UK are really good. If you go to, I understand the bottom here is a really long link that I've put there, but if you Google .gov.uk and Brexit, it will come up with this website and you can go through step by step with your product and identify what the requirements are for your specific area. There are really strict requirements for things like cosmetics and chemicals. And really by now, because we're talking January, which is coming soon, there are things that you should have had in place before now, really, to make sure that's sorted. I understand it's a really quick overview on Brexit here, and I'm not necessarily an expert on Brexit, but I work with some key people that know a lot. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to email the ICW team or put it in the chat here, and we'll see if we can address it either here today or later on. So I want to move on to some other markets really quickly and some things that I've found useful to know, and I want to share them with you. And I know that some of you have signed up from the US, so you might know these cases already. There was a case here, not necessarily with this particular product, but it was a range of products at Polaris. And this was a kind of record-breaking thing. It had never happened before. The highest civil penalty that the CPSC had imposed. So they fined this company $27 million for not notifying the CPSC about product safety issues. So the question came up before about what's the consequence if you don't comply with the legislation or your product's not safe. This is one very serious consequence, you know, a fine of $27 million, and that doesn't even take into consideration the cost of product loss. So you have to obviously get all the product back, destroy the product, give the money back to the customer. You know, these are selling for thousands of dollars. That would cost the company a significant amount of money. And that's something to be aware of. In the UK, it's different. I think the biggest fine the government or to do with legislation under the Consumer Protection Act or Product Liability Directive is about in the thousands, you know, maybe 10,000, not in the millions like the US, but I would highly recommend you have any issues in the US market, you definitely seek advice and work with the CPSC as soon as possible. And there are tools out there. So I've come across quite a few different tools and I'm sharing those with you, like the government website I shared. There's this regulatory robot that the CPSC have developed. So you can go onto the website and you walk through the process, you put in your product, and it then actually populates what requirements are applicable for your product. And that's really useful to know. You know, most certainly the team at ICW and the labs that they work with can help as well identifying legislation, but you are also responsible as well. You can't rely solely on the lab or another partner necessarily. You have to take responsibility. And this is a really good way of checking what requirements are relevant for your particular products. And it's really important that you know your suppliers. And again, with the ISIL system that ICW have that can introduce you to reputable suppliers, that's really important. Suppliers that may have already tested the product and you know, selling the same product but in multiple avenues, that's a really good thing to consider because it does cost, you know, money and I understand that. So that's kind of legislation and compliance, just a quick introduction to that. And now we're going to talk about risk assessment, which is something I could spend probably 5 days talking about, but I'm just got another 20 minutes to talk about this. So how do you do a risk assessment? I would love if people can put in the chat if you know how you do your risk assessment. I had to do a risk assessment this morning with the lovely Kylie and Jan. We had to make sure the webinar was set up okay. That was our risk assessment. I had to, you know, figure out where am I going to get the best Wi-Fi signal in my house. That's a risk assessment. You know, what am I going to wear? Potentially a risk assessment. So we all do these risk assessments naturally. You know, if we go out, we cross the road, if we do some activity, we do risk assessments. They're not that scary. Some people get really overwhelmed and scared. Oh, risk assessment. But we actually do them, you know, quite naturally anyway. And I'm going to talk about different ways that you can do that. Is it legally required is a question I get asked quite a lot. And I would say yes. I think you could argue the other way. But for sure, the majority of the time, yeah, you are required to do a risk assessment. Does everybody do them? No, they don't. And I know that. And I know that when an issue comes up, if you've had trading standards or an authority knocking on your door, then that's when the risk assessment takes place. It's a bit late then. Really, you need to be doing it up front. It's a bit late for a number of reasons. One, because it's legally required, but also the stress. You know, if you've not done a risk assessment before, you're not used to it, and you're thrown into it in a stressful situation when you've got, you know, authorities on your case and customer complaints, that can make it a very difficult time to do a risk assessment. So there are different risk assessments as well that you can do. And I've worked with so many different organisations, and that's why I absolutely love what I do. Some do pre-market risk assessments and post-market risk assessments. Some just do post, some don't do any. But there is a difference. You can't be expected to do an in-depth risk analysis or risk assessment. Like when I do a risk assessment for my clients, it's normally a week or two turnaround time, and it probably takes 2-3 days solid of my time working out calculations, etc. You can't be expected to do that for every single product that you're putting on the market, unless you're only selling one. Then yeah, probably you should. But before you put the product on market, you should most certainly have some type of risk assessment done. This is where you'll be looking at all the hazards, and I'll go through a list and help you with that. It should be quick, you know, maybe like half hour, 10 minutes, whatever it is. And there might be lots of them, and it's quite a summary. On the flip side, when you're doing almost like, you know, a root cause analysis or FMEA, that's when you want to have some more details around it. But that's just to give you an idea of the different types of risk assessment. But the one thing I want to say about, regardless of where you've done your risk assessment or how you've done your risk assessment, is you need to write it down. I was on an expert witness course. Expert witness is about standing up in court as an expert witness, either in defence or prosecution. And on that course, the one thing I took away was that if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So if you're in a court situation on a product safety issue and they say, where's your risk assessment? And you said, yeah, I had a discussion with, you know, Bob in QA, and this is what it's not going to look very good at all. Whereas if you can provide a document that says, this is what we discussed, this is what we agreed, it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, that's what you agreed at that time, it's going to be a lot better and a lot better defense with that. And you can't remember as well, if you did a risk assessment, sometimes if I've done a risk assessment yesterday, I can't even remember what I did. So writing it down is a really key thing. And product safety issues can happen 5 years later, 2 years later. So it's important that you have that documentation. So there are a number of ways you can do a risk assessment. As I mentioned, you can just do it and not document it like we did with the ICW team this morning. But for your products, you're going to want to write them down and have some possible system that works for you. There is something called the NOMOGRAPH. It was known as the New Zealand NOMOGRAPH, and I'm going to show you that really quickly, and that is available online. Some people use that actually as the pre-risk assessment. It's quite a quick way to screen something if you can access it and get the table right. And then there's the GPSD risk assessment guidelines, which is actually a decision. If you want to get those guidelines, that number there, so 2019-417/EU, you just type that into Google and it will actually come up and you can access that decision for free online. And there might be other ones there. You know, you might have, I know the health and safety executives have different risk assessments. There's so many risk assessments out there, and that's fine. So this is the NOMOGRAPH. So if you go to the ACCC website, so the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, they actually do reference the European General Product Safety Directive decision that I noted before within their document. And if you go to the website and you click on the link, you can access it as I've shown you here. They've got guidelines on how to do it, and then they've got the instructions for use. And I'm going to show you what it looks like. This is basically what it looks like. And what we're talking about here is with your product, you've got the severity level. You can see there on the left of the slide is the 1, 2, 3, 4. That's what they've taken from the European General Product Safety Directive decision. So a severity 1 is basically basic treatment. A severity 2 is A&E and less than 6 months affecting the functionality. A level 3 is hospitalization and where it may affect more than 6 months. And level 4 is death. So the guidelines within the European document I mentioned is really helpful, and it actually lists out all of the hazards. It's got examples for laceration or airway obstruction, and it will show you what's a level 1 or a level 4. And then you're looking at here the probability of the hazard occurring. So you can see on the slide there, it's got remote, unlikely, possible. And you've got the hazard, they take into consideration the hazard recognition. So would somebody recognize, for example, a knife, somebody know that it's got a sharp point? You would think, yeah, it's, you know, it's almost inevitable, or it's definitely probable. And then it gives you your first risk assessment. You can see that line there that's got extremely high and then virtually non-existent. And then it takes into consideration how the availability, so how much is on the market. So things like mobile phones, they're everywhere, versus something that's really quite, you know, small. Not a lot of people have them. And that's quite an interesting thing they take into consideration with their particular risk assessment. So yes, that's available online and you can have a go at doing that. Looking differently, a different risk assessment methodology is the one that I've mentioned. This is the one that I use most of the time, and within the document, it's a really large document, but if you go down to this page here, which shows the schematic flow of the risk assessment, I find that quite useful. And that basically looks at, as you can see there, describing the product. What hazards have you got associated with it? So if I have a pencil here, you know, I've got a sharp point, or I've got a bottle, and maybe is it entrapment hazard? The consumers, so it could be all consumers. Is it children or the elderly? That's where you really want to, if there's anything to do with the vulnerable. And then you look at an injury scenario, and I'm going to show you the example that they have within the decision. And I've got the decision at the bottom right of the slide there again. And then it looks at severity. So as I mentioned before, so laceration, bruising, concussion. In the document, it will tell you what level it is. Is it a level 1 or a level 4? And you might have 2 different types of injury severity. It could actually kill someone, and it could, you know, cut them a level 2 as well. So you might want to look at 2 different severities. And then it comes out with a probability. So it comes out with a number. And then you have that to show on the table 4. Shows where you are. Are you in the high, severe, medium, or low? And that gives you an indication. So I'm going to talk about this specific one in a bit of detail. So here is from the document, again, is an example of, they give a folding chair. So you're sitting on a chair and then basically getting your finger caught in the chair. And they're looking here at a severity. You can see at the top is a fracture of the finger, or the next one is a loss of digit. And there might be more scenarios that you're actually looking at. And they've gone here, this is the probability. So you're walking through the steps, unfolding the chair, clamps, and then you come out with probabilities. They're worked out there on the side. I know this is quite detailed at the moment, but we can talk about it more in detail if you want to contact ICW or myself. And that's how they work it out, and they have those. So you need your calculator for sure when you're doing this risk assessment. But the good thing that I use is the online version. I'll show you that in a moment. So it's come out here, and just where that's plotted on the chart, I've just shown you that visually so you can see how that comes out. So they actually have an online version of the risk assessment guidelines. So if you go to this website here, I know that that's a really long link. Again, we're going to be sending out the presentation after, but if you have any issues, just contact ICW and they can contact me, and I can send you that link, no problem. I basically use this as a posh calculator. The problem I have with this is that you can't put the rationale for each step. So where before they had, you know, unfolding the chair and the chair clamps, and they've got a number. If the chair clamps at 1 in 1,000, why have you come out with that number? You know, that is a really important thing to have written down. And, you know, if you can say, well, actually, I did a study of 1,000 people, or I tested the product. Sorry, I tested the product 1,000 times, and, you know, 1 time it clamped. Then that's great, and you can reference that test report. That's why testing can be really good. Or it might be a literature review you did, or you found injury data to support you with that. And that's what I'm going to talk about now, is that justification each step. of the risk assessment. And that can be based on your own knowledge and experience. It can be injury data, can be reports, recall data, and this really helps you understand any hazards or foreseeable use, which is a term that comes up when we're looking at the GPSD. And is it reasonable? You know, is somebody actually really going to do that, or is that so far-fetched it will never happen? So I'm going to go through the next few slides that help you with that and help you with product safety in general. You know, you've got the legislation for sure you need to comply with, but if you've got a new product, or maybe all the hazards aren't identified in the legislation or the standards, and you need to make sure that your product's safe. So here's a list of quite a few hazards there. You just want to check, are there any of these on your product? If you have a product that has all of these hazards, then I would love to know about it, because that's a really bad product probably. And that's a lot of hazards to have on one product, and I'd love to have it for my training, but you're probably only going to have a few of those that you might want to mitigate or do something about. So know what hazards, but how can you do that? And there are things that can help you. So the small parts test cylinder within EN71, and that's what this is. It's also in ASTM F963 as well, and the ISO standards. This helps you identify if something a choking hazard or not. There are things for balls, so if it's a ball shape, a round shape, it's bigger, but there are requirements out there that can really help you identify, is this an airway obstruction hazard or not? And that will help you identify, is it a level 1 or 2, or can it actually lead to a death? Laceration, so looking up recalls or issues on the internet. The internet is amazing. If you Google, you know, your product and then the hazard, and then see if anything comes up. This is a really interesting example that I wanted to note, because this is on the RAPEX system. So this is the European alert system, how they alert all the other member states about any issues with a product. And this was actually, I believe this was a recall withdrawal from the market for a Christmas decoration. Now, Christmas decorations are exempt from the Toy Safety Directive, but this was still notified. So one could argue that it still complied with the legislation, because there actually isn't any legislation really, but they still actually took it off the market because it was a sharp point on it. So even if you comply with the legislation, you really need to make sure that your product's safe, otherwise you still can face an issue. Projectiles, I know that people asked about projectiles. There was a question, and I hope that I'm going to answer it here really. If you've got a product with a projectile, it needs to meet with the requirements of EN71 or ASTM, whatever standard, for sure, at a minimum, and ensuring the product homogeneity, so that the batch that you're making is consistent. You know, obviously, those of you that have children that know, I mean, my son would love this, and he would be firing it at everyone in the house. So you want to make sure that no one's getting injured from those items. And this is again from RAPEX, which is a really great source. As I mentioned earlier on, injury data, I am obsessed with injury data, and this is such a great system. This is from the Consumer Product Safety Commission. It's the NICE system, it's called, so the National Electronic Injury Surveillance System. It's free, which is what gets me super excited. Like the ICW systems are free as well, so that just gets me really excited when things are free to use. But you can go online, if you just Google CPSD NEISS, it will come up, and you can get an Excel spreadsheet of a year's worth of data on all consumer products, any consumer product that they've had. Looking at that data, you can learn and say, okay, well, with projectiles, there's a lot of eye injuries, for example. So how do I mitigate that with my product? So knowledge is power, and it's a really great way of understanding any hazards. I wanted to show this one just because this is a fun one of mine. I say fun, but I was working at an organisation, and the buyer came up to me and said that they really want to start selling this product. It was called a fire starter, and I knew from the name, when you get that gut feel, you're like, no, this is not a good product. And I went on to Amazon, and the reviews on Amazon And actually there were pictures, as you can see there, of somebody who has suffered from blisters from this product. I get it that it's anecdotal evidence. It's not 100% accurate necessarily, but that can be really powerful as well. And that was my risk assessment done. You know, that took me 5 minutes. I sent it across back to the buyer and I said, don't think it's a good idea based on this evidence. He did ask me if I looked at the good reviews, but yes, needless to say, they didn't actually start selling that product. And actually, he found out that it was a great product by other means as well. So, but reports are a really good way of looking to see if there's any issues with a product historically. There are some other considerations that you need to be aware of, and I like this example here. So this is a walkway in China that's really high up and it's glass, but I believe it's got LCD screens and it makes it look like that the floor's cracking when you're walking across it, which is obviously super scary, and I would be very, very scared if I was on that bridge. But if you were walking along it and it looked like it was cracking, that's a perception and that's your reality. You know, you feel like it's actually going to fall. And what's important to think about is, what do you want people to think about your product? What do you want their perception to be of your product? Is it that it's a good product, a safe product? You know your business, because that will be their reality. If you think about the brands that you love to go and shop or buy from, why do you do that? You know what you're getting. There's some that I like to go that are cheaper, but I know what I'm getting, and there's some that are very expensive, and then I like to pay for it because I know what I'm getting. The people's perception is their reality. And a kind of flip side of that, perception is key in product safety. Where you're selling this product may be used very differently than you believe it is. I've worked with so many different cultures and countries, and it is amazing that some stuff that I do and other people don't understand, that's not what's done. So is your product, if you're selling it globally, is it used differently? And have you factored that in to your product safety or to your risk assessment? And in the same kind of tone and respect is children. I'm here on my laptop. My children aren't here today, but they think that I'm on my laptop all day playing games, and they think it's brilliant, because that for them is where they play, although they've done a lot of homeschooling now, so it might have changed over time. But you have at home that we use to, light the cooker, or if e-cigarette, to them, that's an opportunity to play. We've had the fans on recently here because it's been very warm, and my son decided to stick his toy in the fan. This is just what kids do. And I was right next to him. I was literally, managed to stop, but that's how children behave. And if you're working with different organizations, great. If you're working with M&S and John Lewis, they're great companies. They're going to have different risk appetites. Okay. So, I as a independent consultant, I can't go into Marks and Spencer's and maybe Pound World or John Lewis or Amazon, all these different places, and have the same approach, because they're not going to have the same approach. It's going to be very, very different, and they're going to have a very different appetite for risk. So if you're dealing with many different clients, they're going to have many different protocols, and some of them might be really strict and they go way and above beyond legislation, and others are going to be different as well. So you need to know where you're selling and who you're selling to, because that could be a barrier for trade for you. Very quickly, and I'm near the end of my slot here now, to deal with one question. There was a specific question about safety assessment and risk assessment. Fundamentally, safety assessments are noted on things like cosmetics or chemicals, and that's where you do an assessment to a strict set of hazards or a known list or a prescribed list. If you're doing a safety assessment for a cosmetic, you really need to get a toxicologist to be looking at that for you. But then there is also the toy safety assessment that's noted in EN 71 and the safety directive that you're supposed to do. And it's kind of similar to a risk assessment in a way, but the point here is that you need to know your product. if you are selling a cosmetic, for example, and they want a safety assessment, that is a very specific requirement for your product, and you need to make sure that you have that for that particular product. Okay, and I do want to mention this. So this is obviously, if you've been working in product safety, this is one of the key things to mention really, is in 2007 was known as the year of the recall, with what happened to Mattel, where they had to recall a significant amount of product. I didn't work with them or don't know, and you know, I think that this is around now, great company, but obviously something happened in the manufacturing. Chemical lead was introduced somehow within the manufacturing in a paint or somewhere. And it's really important to know your supply chain, because if you get your product tested, if I'm producing 1 million of these and I get first 20 tested and then that's it, and I don't actually look at the production lot or the consistency of production, or working with my suppliers to ensure they know and they understand how important it is, that can come back and bite you quite badly. And as shown there, they had the biggest recall in history. I actually think there's a few that might have come out recently that might have beat that one. But in terms of toy, and I think in terms of manufacturing, the example that I'm giving, that's a good one. So how can you ensure your products are safe? You know, what testing do you need to apply to your products? Where are you doing your inspections? How do you do it? Where are you doing it? How much is it going to cost? Can you get products that have already been tested? The great thing is that the ICW systems can help you with this. And I'm going to pass over to Jan in a moment when she's ready to talk about some of those systems. But we've got iSource that can source suppliers, which is great for you. And the team are really good. If anyone help with testing and what needs to be done, they can certainly help. I'm going to pass over to Jan if she's there, and I hope she is. Otherwise,
okay. Thank you, Geraldine, for introducing.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for introducing product safety and risk assessment. Good day, everyone. I'm Yan Chen, a project manager in research and development team. Let me introduce about how ICW system can help you on the product and supply manager, and how to source laboratory codes through our technology. ICW is a one-stop platform for your supply chain management process, from quality to sourcing. We consolidate testing, inspection, and certification document for suppliers or document into one platform. ICW can help you to collect buyer and supplier. We can help you to source multiple laboratory codes for testing, inspection, and factory audit. In our platform, you can manage and analyze your products and suppliers in cloud. Let's see how we can help you. Okay. Next slide. Yes. In our ICW platform, you can build up your supply database. You can categorize them and hashtag the related keywords for easy searching and filtering. When you click one of the suppliers, yes, next slide, please. When you click one of the suppliers, the supplier profile is shown, and the supplier related information and document can be stored. For example, the address and the supplier, the product details, and the contact person details also. Also, you can upload factory audit certificates or any other documents to the corresponding area. In the message center, you can interact with your supplier through this channel and to collect documents from them. Okay. In product management, you can establish products in cloud for systematic management. In here, the product can be linked with the related supplier, and you can see which product is produced by which supplier or factory. When you click into one of the products, next slide, please. Yes. You can establish products in when you click into one of the products, you can housekeep the reports, certificates, and documents. There is a report expiry alert function, which can remind you when the reports are not valid and need to be renewed. If you want to source different laboratory codes and comparing the codes, you can use our Tegma to search for it. There are only 3 simple steps, and you can get the best price and reserve booking for product testing and inspection. Step 1. Tell us the details on what you are inspecting or testing. For example, for inspection, you can select the inspection day, the inspect product quantity, and tell us the product, category, and the factory location. Then click the See Inspection Offers. Step 2. You will see there is a list of inspection offers, and you can select any service provider that you want. And the final step 3, after you select one of the service providers, you just need to complete and submit the booking form to us. After receive the requested form, our staff will contact you soon. Only 3 simple steps, and you can get multiple codes. If you want to have a full demo on the management tools, you can contact us and we can arrange for it. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, this is really great. And this system, this slide here, I love this because this was one of the first things that I saw, and I think it is based on the technology. I'm not an IT expert, but like when you book a hotel or Trivago or Airbnb, and I love the fact that you can do this, and it's real time. It's, you know, you put in, as explained, you put in where you want to have your inspection, and it comes up straight away with the cost. And I know from working, I mean, I worked in test lab for 12 years, and I know that trying to get costs for things and trying to, you know, from all these different labs and different places is a challenge, and it's time consuming. But the fact that it's just quick and it's there, I was so super impressed with that when I saw that. So I would highly recommend that if you just go to the website icw.io, and you can actually have a go and play with it yourself, for sure.
Yes.
So thank you. Everyone's been quiet. No one's been talking to us, right? So I'm going to see if I can. I'm trying to use the technology now at the same time and see if there's been any questions in the chat. And there hasn't been any questions. So nobody wants to talk to us today. I think if there are no questions on what we've been talking about, let's go back to my presentation. That's our webinar done for today. And thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Feel free, we'd love to get some feedback, because we do hope to run some more webinars like this in the future, possibly in the US as well, for the time zone there. And we would love some topics if there's something specific you want to know about, and we can present that in the next webinar that we do. That's great. Thank you, everyone. And we look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.